If someone had told me that my brother's best friend would ask me to pretend to be his boyfriend, I would have laughed right in their face. Steve? The same Steve who had practically lived at our house since I was 12? The same Steve who used to steal fries off my plate, beat me at every video game imaginable, and call me kid even after I graduated college? Yeah, that's Steve. The crazy part wasn't that he asked. The crazy part was the reason he asked. And somehow, I actually said yes. Looking back now, I probably should have known nothing about that arrangement was ever going to stay fake. My name's Gabriel. I'm 24, work remotely as a graphic designer, and live in a small apartment about 15 minutes away from my parents. Life was comfortable, not exciting. Most days were a mix of client calls, coffee, grocery runs, and trying to convince myself I'd finally start going to the gym. My older brother, Mark, was the complete opposite. Outgoing, loud, always surrounded by people. And right beside him almost every time was Steve. They'd been inseparable since high school. Even after college, even after jobs, even after moving into different places, they still met up almost every weekend. Steve was 30, tall enough that everyone noticed when he walked into a room. Dark hair, always slightly messy, the kind of smile that made strangers smile back without realizing it. He had this calm confidence that never felt arrogant. Girls loved him. Guys wanted to be friends with him. Meanwhile, I'd spent years pretending I didn't notice how ridiculously attractive he was. Because what was the point? He was straight, or at least I thought he was. Besides, he knew me as Mark's annoying little brother. Nothing more. One Friday evening my brother invited me over for a barbecue. Mom keeps asking why you never visit anymore. I literally had dinner there 3 days ago. Doesn't matter. Typical. When I arrived, Steve was already there flipping burgers like he'd somehow become part of the family years ago. There he is, Steve called. The man who ignores everyone's texts. I answered yesterday, 12 hours later. I was working. You were online playing games. I frowned. You can see that? He grinned. I noticed things. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. That was Steve. He teased everyone equally. Nobody ever took it personally. Dinner was loud. Mom kept asking embarrassing questions. Dad talked about football. Mark argued with everyone. Steve mostly listened, occasionally throwing out a joke that made the entire table laugh. Every once in a while, I'd catch him looking in my direction. Not staring, just noticing. At least that's what it felt like. Maybe I imagined it. Wouldn't have been the first time. After everyone finished eating, I stepped onto the back porch with a soda. The evening air felt nice after the summer heat. A minute later, the sliding door opened. Steve walked outside. You hiding? Recovering? My mom asked about your love life too? He laughed. Worse. What could be worse? My aunt asked when I'm finally getting married. Ouch. Exactly. We stood there quietly for a moment. Comfortable silence. It wasn't awkward. It never really was with Steve. So, he finally said, I need a favor. I laughed. That's never a good way to start a sentence. It's not a huge favor. It definitely is. He rubbed the back of his neck. For the first time in as long as I'd known him, he actually looked nervous. You ever fake date someone? I blinked. What? He looked away toward the yard. I know how that sounded. No, explain. My cousin's getting married next month. Congratulations. My entire family is going. Okay. They've spent the last 5 years trying to set me up with every single woman they know. I nodded. Sounds exhausting. It is. So tell them you're not interested. I have. They don't listen. I laughed. They really don't. He sighed. My grandmother is convinced I'm secretly in love with my accountant. Are you? He snorted. No. Just checking. Then he looked at me. Actually looked at me. So I had an idea. The way he said it immediately made me nervous. I don't think I'm going to like this idea. You probably won't. Try me. He hesitated. Then finally said, what if you came with me? I frowned. To the wedding? As my boyfriend. I honestly thought I'd misheard him. What? My fake boyfriend? I stared. He stared back. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. Finally, I burst out laughing. He didn't. Oh, you were serious. Very. I pointed at myself. Steve. I'm Gabriel. I know. And your best friend's little brother. I know. So why me? He smiled slightly. Because I trust you. That answer caught me completely off guard. You'd rather spend an entire weekend pretending to date me than deal with your relatives? Without question. I laughed again. You realize how insane this sounds? I've thought about it for 2 weeks. You've been planning this for 2 weeks? I needed courage to ask. I couldn't tell if he was joking. His face said he wasn't. I'd pay for the hotel. I don't care about the hotel. The food. I can buy food. I'll owe you. You already owe me $20 from bowling. He smiled. I knew you'd bring that up. I should have said no. Honestly, every logical part of my brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. Pretending to date the guy I'd secretly had a crush on for years? That sounded less like a favor and more like emotional self-destruction. But then Steve quietly added, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Something in his voice made me pause. He wasn't joking anymore. He genuinely needed help. And somehow, that made saying no a lot harder than I expected. I spent the entire drive home trying to convince myself I'd imagined the conversation. Steve asking me to fake date him? It sounded ridiculous. The more I thought about it, though, the more it made a strange kind of sense. His family really was relentless. I'd met them a handful of times over the years, and every single visit included at least one aunt asking why Steve was still single. One cousin would joke that he was too picky. His grandmother had once introduced him to the waitress at a restaurant. So, yeah, I believed that part. What I couldn't believe was that he'd chosen me. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Steve, coffee? I stared at the message for almost a minute. This about yesterday. Yep. Trying to convince me? Maybe. I sighed. Give me 30 minutes. The coffee shop wasn't busy. Steve was already there when I arrived, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, looking far too comfortable for someone asking another guy to pretend to be his boyfriend. He stood when he saw me. You came. I wanted answers. Fair. We ordered coffee before finding a table in the corner. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I leaned forward. So, explain. He smiled. I figured you'd say that. You think. My cousin Emily's wedding is in 3 weeks. I remember. My entire family will be there. I nodded. My parents. My grandparents. My aunts. My uncles. My cousins. They're all going to spend the weekend asking why I'm still single. Still tracking. So. He took a sip of coffee. I figured showing up with someone would end those conversations. For 1 weekend? Hopefully forever. I laughed. You underestimate families. I know. They'll probably start asking when you're getting married instead. He groaned. I know. I folded my arms. You still haven't answered my question. Which one? Why me? He looked at me for a second, then shrugged. You're easy to be around. I blinked. That's your answer? It's part of it. What else? He hesitated. I trust you. You already said that. I meant it. I looked away for a moment. Steve wasn't the kind of person who threw compliments around. If he said something, he usually meant it. I thought about asking a friend from work. What happened? She thought I was proposing. I laughed so hard people looked over. You serious? I wish I wasn't. And then, I spent 20 minutes explaining I only needed someone to fake date me. How'd that go? I got blocked. I laughed even harder. Steve rubbed his forehead. I've had a rough month. Once I finally stopped laughing, he looked at me again. So, what? Will you think about it? I already am. And I haven't decided. He nodded. Fair enough. No pressure. No guilt. Just patience. That somehow made it even harder. Couple days passed. I tried not to think about it. Keyword, tried. Every time my phone buzzed, I wondered if it was Steve. Every time Mark mentioned him, my ears perked up. It was embarrassing. I'd had a stupid crush on Steve for years. I'd learned to live with it. Now he wanted to spend an entire weekend pretending we were together. That wasn't helping. Not even a little. Wednesday evening Mark called me. You busy Saturday? Depends. Poker night. I don't play poker. You eat pizza. Good point. You coming? Sure. Mark's apartment was exactly as chaotic as always. Boxes in one corner. A half-built bookshelf in another. Someone had left a football helmet on the kitchen counter for reasons no one could explain. Steve was already there. He looked up as I walked in. Hey! Hey! Neither of us mentioned coffee. Neither of us mentioned fake dating. It almost felt normal. Almost. Around 10 that night, everyone else got distracted by a heated poker argument. Steve nudged my shoulder. Walk. Sure. We stepped onto the apartment balcony. The city lights stretched across the skyline. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Steve broke the silence. I've been thinking. That's dangerous. He smiled. I know. I don't want you saying yes because you feel bad for me. I don't. I mean it. I know. If you're uncomfortable, I'll say no. He nodded. Good. You know, I said, you could just hire someone. I thought about it. And I'd rather spend the weekend with someone I actually like. The sentence landed harder than he probably intended. Someone I actually like. I looked over at him. He was staring out at the city like he hadn't just casually rearranged my entire emotional stability. I have one condition. He turned toward me. You'll do it. I'm considering it. I'll take considering. My condition first. I'm listening. No ridiculous public displays. He laughed. I wasn't planning any. No kissing. His smile disappeared for just a second. Then he nodded. Fair. No sleeping in the same bed. Already booked 2 rooms. I looked surprised. You did. I wasn't going to assume. That actually meant a lot. And one more thing. What? If we're doing this, you can't call me kid. He laughed. I still do that? Constantly. I never noticed. I did. He rubbed the back of his neck. Okay. No more kid. And no embarrassing childhood stories. He winced. There goes half my material. I'm serious. I know. I held out my hand. One weekend. He looked down at it, then shook it. One weekend. His hand was warm. His grip was steady. Neither of us let go immediately. It only lasted a second. Maybe 2. But somehow, felt longer. Then Mark slid the balcony door open. There you two are. We both stepped apart a little too quickly. Mark frowned. What are you guys doing out here? Steve answered before I could. Making a deal. Mark grinned. As long as it doesn't involve borrowing money. Steve and I exchanged a quick glance. If only he knew. After that night, everything felt different. Not because anything had actually changed, but because now there was an expiration date attached to us. 3 weeks. Then 1 weekend together. Then we'd go back to being exactly what we'd always been. At least that was the plan. On Monday afternoon, Steve called me. I need another favor. I laughed. You realize you're using up all your favors pretty quickly. This one's related. I'm listening. We should probably practice. Practice what? Dating. I nearly dropped my phone. You cannot be serious. I am. You think your family is going to quiz us? They absolutely will. That was enough for me to believe him. We agreed to meet at a small park downtown. When I got there, Steve was sitting on a bench with 2 iced coffees. You remembered my order? You've ordered the same thing for 3 years. You pay attention. I guess I do. That answer settled in my chest a little too comfortably. Okay, Steve said once we sat down. Rule number 1. We have rules now? We need them. I sighed dramatically. Fine. If my family asks how we met, we tell the truth? He shook his head. Not exactly. What? If they find out you're Mark's little brother, the whole thing falls apart. I frowned. Why? Because then they'll tell Mark. And I'd rather explain after the wedding. Fair. So what's our story? Steve pulled out his phone. You made notes. I like being prepared. I couldn't stop smiling. You really have been thinking about this. For weeks. He opened the note. We met at a coffee shop. Original. I know. You asked what I was reading. I don't even read in coffee shops. You do now. I laughed. This is terrible. I panicked. We spent almost an hour inventing ridiculous details. Favorite movie. Where our first date supposedly happened. Which one of us texted first. How long we'd been together. Every answer had to match. Every little detail mattered. You realize this is insane? I said. A little. A little. He smiled. My grandmother remembers everyone's birthdays without Facebook. Oh, exactly. Eventually we took a break and started walking through the park. It was a warm afternoon. People were jogging. Kids were chasing pigeons. Dogs seemed happier than everyone else. Steve glanced toward me. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you still single? I looked at him. Really? What? You've known me half my life. I know. So why ask now? He shrugged. I guess I've never actually asked. I thought about lying. Instead, I shrugged. I've gone on dates. But they never really went anywhere. You lose interest? Usually. Nobody special? I smiled to myself. Not available. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Steve looked at me for a second. That's hard. Yeah. They know. I shook my head. No. He nodded slowly. I hope they figure it out someday. Something about the way he said it sounded personal. What about you? I asked. He laughed. My dating history? Yeah. It's a disaster. I refuse to believe that. It's true. What happened? I kept waiting for relationships to feel right. And they didn't? No. You just never met the right person? He looked straight ahead. Maybe. There was something unfinished about that answer. I noticed it, but I didn't push. As we reached a quieter walking trail, Steve suddenly slowed down. One more thing. Oh no. My family. They're affectionate. I blinked. What does that mean? It means they hug. I can hug people. They expect couples to act like couples. I looked at him suspiciously. Steve, I'm just warning you. No kissing. I remember. No cuddling. I remember. No sitting in your lap. He burst out laughing. I wasn't planning that. You hesitated. I absolutely did not. A few minutes later, we stopped near the lake. Steve looked around before speaking quietly. Can we at least practice walking together? Walking. So it doesn't look awkward. I know how to walk. Not like you're dating someone. I stared at him. There's a difference? Apparently. He held out his hand. My stomach immediately tied itself into a knot. It's just practice. I know. You can say no. I looked at his hand. Then at him. It was fake. Completely fake. That's all. Slowly, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed gently around mine. Warm. Comfortable. Natural. Far more natural than I expected. Neither of us spoke. We just started walking. Should have felt awkward. Instead, felt strangely easy. Like we'd done it before. Our hands swung slightly as we walked. A little old couple walking their dog smiled at us on the path. So cute, the woman said as they passed. I nearly tripped over my own feet. Steve chuckled beside me. Relax. I'm trying. They bought it. I noticed. We finally let go near the parking lot. For some reason, my hand suddenly felt cold. Steve shoved both hands into his hoodie pocket. I think we're going to pull this off. Maybe. You were convincing. I was panicking. I couldn't tell. I laughed. Liar. I'm serious. He smiled at me. I think my family is going to love you. I looked away before he could see the ridiculous grin trying to spread across my face. That was exactly the problem. I was starting to worry. I might like pretending a little too much. The wedding was on a Friday, which meant Steve showed up at my apartment Thursday evening with an overnight bag, 2 garment bags, and enough nervous energy to power a small city. "You packed?" he asked before I'd even said hello. "I've been packed since yesterday." He blinked. "Really? I've never fake dated anyone before." He laughed. "I figured. I wasn't going to be the reason your plan fell apart." For a second, he just looked at me. Then he smiled. "I appreciate that." The drive to the hotel took a little over 3 hours. At first, we listened to music. Then we argued about which fast food fries were actually the best. Then we somehow spent 40 minutes debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza. "It absolutely does," I insisted. "It absolutely doesn't. It's sweet and salty. It's a crime. It's delicious. It's evidence." I couldn't stop laughing. "You've seriously thought about this?" "I have standards." Somewhere along the highway, the conversation slowed. Steve drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. "You nervous?" "A little." "Me too." "You?" He nodded. "I've lied to clients. I've lied to my boss. I've even lied to my grandmother about liking her fruitcake. But this," he glanced at me, "this feels different." I understood exactly what he meant, because it felt different to me too. We checked into the hotel just after 5. Steve had been telling the truth. 2 separate rooms. Side by side. He handed me one of the key cards. "I figured we'd have a little privacy." I smiled. "Thanks. I know this is already asking a lot." "It is. I'm still grateful." The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to regret saying yes. We barely had time to unpack before his phone buzzed. "They're downstairs," he said. "My family?" He nodded. "They're already asking where we are." I took a slow breath. "This is it." He looked at me for a second, then quietly held out his hand. "Ready?" I stared at it. A week ago, I would have panicked. Now, I slipped my hand into his. "Ready." The hotel lobby suddenly felt 100 times bigger. And louder. I spotted Steve's family almost immediately. His parents. His grandparents. A handful of cousins. An aunt who somehow noticed us before anyone else. There he is. Every head turned. Steve squeezed my hand once. Just once. Like a silent reminder. "You've got this." His mother reached us first. "There you are." She hugged Steve tightly before turning to me. "And you must be Gabriel." I smiled. "It's nice to finally meet you." "Oh, Steve has talked about you." I looked at him. "He has." Steve suddenly looked very interested in the hotel carpet. His mother laughed. "Enough that we were beginning to think you were imaginary." Introductions blurred together. Names. Handshakes. Smiles. Questions. "So how did you two meet?" "The coffee shop," Steve answered smoothly, just like we'd practiced. "And who asked who out?" I smiled. "I did." Steve looked at me with perfectly acted surprise. "You did. You took forever." His cousin burst out laughing. "I already like him." Everything was going perfectly. Until, wait. An older woman narrowed her eyes. "You look familiar." My heart stopped. Steve's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've seen you somewhere." I forced a smile. "I don't think so." She tilted her head. "No. Maybe not." I tried not to breathe. After another second, she shrugged. "Must be someone else." Steve quietly exhaled beside me. That had been far too close. Dinner that evening was held in a private room at the hotel. I ended up sitting beside Steve. Mostly because everyone else assumed that's where I belonged. His grandmother smiled at us from across the table. "You two are adorable." I nearly inhaled my drink. Steve casually rubbed my back while I coughed. "You okay?" "Fine." His hand lingered for only a second before dropping away. The gesture had looked effortless. Natural. No one questioned it. Unfortunately, neither did my heart. Later that night, after everyone had gone upstairs, Steve and I wandered onto the quiet hotel terrace. The music from the reception hall echoed faintly through the open doors. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I broke the silence. "I think your grandmother likes me." He laughed. "She likes everyone." "No, I think she really likes me." "She does." We both smiled. "You were amazing today," Steve said quietly. "I almost got recognized. But you didn't. Barely. You handled everything." He leaned against the railing. "I couldn't have done this without you." I looked out over the lights of the city. "You keep thanking me. Because I mean it." I turned toward him. "You know." "What?" "This doesn't really feel fake anymore." The words escaped before I could stop them. Steve looked at me. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, small, thoughtful, almost nervous. "No," he said softly. "It really doesn't." Before I could figure out what that meant, voices called from inside. "There you two are." Steve cleared his throat. "Guess we're needed." As we walked back toward the ballroom, our shoulders brushed together. Neither of us moved away. And for the first time since this whole arrangement had started, I wasn't sure which part was the act anymore. Saturday morning started earlier than I would have liked. At 7:30, someone knocked on my hotel room door. I opened it, still half asleep. Steve stood there holding 2 coffees. "You look terrible," he said. "Good morning to you too." I brought peace offerings. I accepted the coffee. "You're forgiven." He smiled. "I figured you'd need caffeine before dealing with my family again." "You mean surviving your family?" "Exactly." Breakfast was louder than dinner had been. Apparently Steve's relatives became even more energetic before 9 in the morning. His cousins argued over seating. His uncle was telling the same fishing story he'd apparently been telling for 15 years. His grandmother insisted everyone needed more pancakes. Felt strangely normal, like I'd somehow wandered into a family I'd known for years. "Gabriel." I looked up. Steve's mom smiled at me from across the table. "Come sit next to me." I glanced at Steve. He shrugged. "You're popular." "So?" his mom said while pouring coffee. "Tell me something Steve doesn't know about you." I laughed. "That's dangerous." "Oh, I like dangerous." I thought for a second. "I play the guitar." Steve immediately looked over. "You do." I blinked. "You didn't know?" "No. You never asked." He looked genuinely surprised. "I've known you for years. And yet." His mother laughed. "Looks like you boys still have things to learn about each other." For some reason, that sentence stayed with me. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful. Simple. Elegant. The kind where everyone ended up smiling even if they promised they wouldn't cry. Steve and I sat together in the 3rd row. At one point, the bride started crying during her vows. I heard someone sniffle beside me. I turned. Steve quickly looked away. "You crying?" "No. Steve. It's allergies. We're indoors. Emotional allergies." I couldn't stop smiling. The reception was held in a large ballroom overlooking a lake. Music, dancing, champagne, people laughing louder with every passing hour. Steve leaned closer. "You dance." "Barely." "So, no." I didn't say no. "You absolutely implied it." About an hour later, the DJ invited all the couples onto the dance floor. I froze. Steve looked at me. "We can skip it." I looked around. Almost every couple was getting up. His grandmother was already waving at us. "Go." His cousin grinned. "Don't leave him hanging, Steve." I sighed dramatically. "I can't believe I'm doing this." Steve stood and held out his hand. "May I?" I rolled my eyes. "You're enjoying this?" "A little." I took his hand. The music was slow, not painfully romantic, just soft enough that everyone naturally moved closer together. "I should warn you," I said. "I'm terrible. We're just swaying. I can mess that up. I have faith." His hands settled carefully around my waist. Mine rested awkwardly on his shoulders. For the first few seconds, neither of us knew where to look. Then Steve laughed. "What? We're both overthinking this." "A little." "A lot." I nodded. "A lot." Eventually, the awkwardness faded. We found a rhythm. Nothing fancy, just moving together with the music. Around us, conversations continued. Laughter echoed across the ballroom. For one brief moment, it felt like there wasn't anyone else there. Just us. Steve looked down at me. "You okay?" "Yeah. You seem quiet." "I was thinking. Dangerous. I learned from you." He smiled. "I'll take responsibility." Near the end of the song, I noticed several people watching us. Not suspiciously, fondly. Steve's grandmother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. His mother leaned against her husband with a huge smile. "They're going to think this is real," I whispered. Steve's expression softened. "I think they already do." Something about the way he answered made my stomach flip. The song ended. People applauded. As we started walking back toward our table, Steve's little cousin Emma, who couldn't have been older than 8, ran over and grabbed my hand. "Gabriel." "Hey, Emma." She looked up at me very seriously. "Are you gonna marry Steve?" I almost choked. Steve coughed beside me. Emma waited patiently. Children had a terrifying talent for asking impossible questions. I smiled awkwardly. "I think that's a little far away." She frowned. "But you look happy together." Steve and I exchanged a quick glance. Neither of us had an answer. Emma shrugged. "My mommy says when people smile like that, it means they love each other." Then she ran back toward the dessert table before either of us could respond. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Steve cleared his throat. "Kids." "Yeah. They say whatever they're thinking." I noticed. We both laughed. But the laughter faded quickly, because neither of us could ignore what she'd said. That evening, after most of the guests had gone upstairs, I slipped outside onto the balcony overlooking the lake. The air was cool, peaceful, exactly what I needed. A minute later, the door opened behind me. "I figured I'd find you here," Steve said. "I needed some air." He nodded and leaned against the railing beside me. "You've been quiet since the dance." "I know. Everything okay?" I stared out at the reflection of the moon on the water. Then, before I could stop myself, I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind all weekend. "Steve." "Yeah. If your family wasn't here, if none of this was fake, would you still want to spend time with me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Gentle, careful, almost vulnerable. Finally, he smiled. "Gabriel, I don't think that's the question we should be asking anymore." Before I could ask what he meant, voices called for us from inside. The moment was gone, but the look in his eyes stayed with me. And for the first time since this fake relationship had begun, I started wondering if Steve had been fighting feelings of his own. I barely slept that night, not because of the hotel, not because of the wedding, because of Steve. His answer kept replaying in my head. "I don't think that's the question we should be asking anymore." What was that supposed to mean? Had I imagined the way he'd looked at me? Or had he been trying to tell me something without actually saying it? Sunday morning arrived too quickly. The wedding weekend was almost over. Part of me was relieved. Another part didn't want it to end. I hated admitting that, because the moment we drove home, everything was supposed to go back to normal. Steve would be my brother's best friend again. I'd go back to pretending I wasn't hopelessly into him. That was the deal, wasn't it? Checkout wasn't until 11, so we had breakfast with the rest of the family. Steve's grandmother hugged me before we left. "It was wonderful meeting you, sweetheart." "You too." She smiled warmly. "Don't disappear." "I'll try not to." Then she leaned in close enough that only I could hear. "Take good care of my grandson." I froze. "I will." She patted my arm before walking away. For some reason, that simple conversation hit me harder than I expected. Once everyone had said their goodbyes, it was just Steve and me again. The drive home started quietly. Neither of us turned on the radio. Neither of us seemed to know what to say. About an hour into the trip, Steve finally broke the silence. So, you've been avoiding looking at me." I sighed. "I know. Why?" I watched the highway stretch ahead of us. Because this weekend messed with my head. He didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke. He simply nodded. Mine too. We stopped at a small diner for lunch. It was almost empty. The waitress seated us in a booth by the window. When she came back with menus, she smiled. You two are cute together. I nearly dropped my menu. Steve thanked her like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. After she walked away, I looked at him. You didn't correct her. He smiled faintly. I noticed. We ordered our food. For several minutes, neither of us touched it. Finally, I put my fork down. I need to ask you something. I'm listening. You could have asked anyone. I could have. But you asked me. I did. Why? Steve looked out the window for a long moment before answering. Do you remember your 21st birthday? I frowned. A little. You got overwhelmed. I laughed softly. There were way too many people. You disappeared. I went outside. Steve nodded. I found you sitting on the porch. The memory slowly came back. You stayed with me. For almost 2 hours. You never told anyone where I was. You asked me not to. I smiled. I forgot about that. I didn't. He folded his hands on the table. That night you thanked me. I probably did. You said. He hesitated. You're the only person who never makes me feel like I have to pretend to be someone else. I stared at him. I actually said that? You did. I was drunk. You were honest. The words settled between us. Quiet, heavy, real. I've never forgotten it, Steve continued. When this wedding came up, you were the first person I thought of. I couldn't find anything to say. Not because I didn't have words, because I suddenly had too many. After lunch, we got back in the car. About 20 minutes later, traffic came to a complete stop. Construction. Cars weren't moving. Steve sighed. Looks like we're stuck. I looked over at him. Can I ask something else? You can ask anything. My heart pounded. When did this stop being fake for you? He smiled to himself. I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. But he rested both hands on the steering wheel. I think it happened when we practiced holding hands. I blinked. That early. I knew something felt different. You didn't say anything. I wasn't going to. Why? Because I thought I was imagining it. He looked at me for the first time since the traffic stopped. And because I was terrified. Terrified of what? That you'd only ever see me as your brother's best friend. I laughed quietly. You really thought that? I did. I shook my head. Steve, I've had a crush on you for years. His eyes widened. Years. I nodded. Since I was 19. He stared at me in complete disbelief. Gabriel, I never expected anything to happen. I figured you'd always see me as Mark's annoying little brother. Steve let out one stunned laugh. You've got to be kidding me. What? I've spent the last year trying to convince myself I wasn't developing feelings for you. Now it was my turn to stare. A year. He nodded. I kept telling myself it was a terrible idea. My best friend's brother. The age difference. Everything. So I ignored it. He smiled helplessly. Then this fake dating idea gave me an excuse to spend time with you. Neither of us spoke. Cars slowly began moving again. But inside the car, everything had already changed. I guess, I said quietly, we're both pretty bad at saying what we feel. Steve laughed. I think that's an understatement. A comfortable silence settled between us. Not awkward, not uncertain, just peaceful. As we finally reached the edge of the city, Steve glanced at me with the same soft smile he'd worn all weekend. There is one problem. What? We're almost home. I already knew exactly what he meant. The fake relationship was over. But neither of us wanted whatever this had become to end. Neither of us rushed to get out of the car when Steve pulled up outside my apartment. The engine was off. The air conditioning had stopped. But neither of us reached for the door. So, I said. So, Steve replied. I guess this is where the fake relationship ends. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah. The silence that followed felt heavier than any we'd shared all weekend. Finally, I looked at him. I don't want to pretend anymore. Steve turned toward me. You mean? I mean, if we're going to do this. I laughed nervously. I'd rather do it for real. For a second, he just stared at me. Then the biggest smile I'd ever seen spread across his face. I was hoping you'd say that. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. So, I asked, what happens now? He leaned back in his seat and let out a long breath. Now we deal with the scary part. I already knew what he meant. My brother. He nodded. Your brother. Mark called less than an hour later. Poker tonight? I looked over at Steve, who was sitting on my couch finishing the coffee we'd picked up on the way home. I put the phone on speaker. Sure. Great. You and Steve both coming? Steve answered before I could. Yeah. Awesome. Mark sounded completely normal, which somehow made me even more nervous. By the time we reached Mark's apartment, my stomach was in knots. Steve noticed. You okay? No. Want me to do the talking? I nodded immediately. Please. He laughed softly. I figured. Mark opened the door wearing sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. There you are. He stepped aside to let us in. The pizza just got here. Everything felt strangely ordinary. Too ordinary. We sat down in the living room. Nobody touched the pizza. Finally, Mark frowned. Okay. What's going on? Steve looked at me. I nodded. He took a slow breath. There's something we need to tell you. Mark immediately looked concerned. Nobody died, right? No. You two aren't in trouble? No. Mark folded his arms. Then what? Steve glanced at me one last time before speaking. Gabriel and I are together. Mark blinked. Silence. A full 5 seconds passed. Then 10. I started preparing myself for the worst. Finally, Mark looked at Steve. Seriously? Yeah. Then he looked at me. You happy? The question caught me completely off guard. Yeah. A lot. I smiled despite myself. Yeah. Mark nodded once. Then I'm happy too. Steve and I both stared at him. That's it? I asked. He frowned. What? I thought you'd be angry. Why? Because. I gestured awkwardly between Steve and myself. You're my brother. And he's your best friend. Mark shrugged. So? Steve looked just as confused as I felt. You knew? Steve asked carefully. Mark burst out laughing. Knew? You two are terrible at hiding things. My jaw dropped. What? He pointed at Steve. You've looked at Gabriel like he's the only person in the room for months. Then he pointed at me. And you've been blushing every time Steve walked into the house since you were, what, 19? I buried my face in my hands. Oh my God. Mark laughed even harder. I kept waiting for one of you idiots to figure it out. Steve looked genuinely offended. You could have said something. I considered it. What stopped you? I was enjoying the show. The tension disappeared almost instantly. We ordered more pizza. Turned on a basketball game none of us actually watched. For the first time all evening, everything felt easy. At one point Mark got up to grab drinks from the kitchen, leaving Steve and me alone on the couch. Steve leaned closer. I think we worried for nothing. I think your best friend is evil. Steve laughed. A little. I glanced toward the kitchen before quietly reaching for his hand. He intertwined his fingers with mine without hesitation. No pretending. No rehearsing. No fake story. Just us. Mark walked back into the room carrying 3 sodas. He looked down at our joined hands, smirked, then handed us our drinks. Took you long enough. Steve and I looked at each other before laughing. Maybe we had taken a long time, but somehow felt exactly like the right time. A week passed, then another. For the first time since I'd met Steve, we weren't pretending anymore. There was no wedding, no fake story, no relatives watching us. Just real life. Oddly enough, that was much scarier. Dating Steve turned out to be surprisingly normal. He still stole fries off my plate. Still teased me whenever I took too long choosing something on a menu. Still sent me terrible memes at 2 in the morning. The only difference was that now he'd end every conversation with, "Good night, Gabe," or "Drive safe," or sometimes, "Miss you already." Those little messages somehow meant more than grand romantic gestures ever could. One Friday evening he texted me, "Steve, be ready at 7. Me, "For what?" "Steve, a real date." Me, "You already took me to a wedding." "Steve, that doesn't count." Me, "Why not?" "Steve, because you were fake dating me." A second later, another message appeared. "Steve, tonight I'm taking my boyfriend out." I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. At exactly 7, he knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, he was holding a single sunflower. Not roses, not anything expensive, just a sunflower. "You remembered." He smiled. "You told my mom once that they're your favorite." I stared at the flower. "I said that years ago." "I know." "You remembered?" "You'd be surprised what I remember." My heart honestly didn't stand a chance. Dinner was at a little Italian restaurant by the river. Nothing fancy. No tuxedos. No pretending. Just two people getting to know each other all over again. Halfway through dinner I laughed. "What? This is weird." "Why? I've known you for over a decade." "True. But somehow," I smiled, "it feels like I'm meeting you for the first time." Steve looked down at his plate before smiling. "I know exactly what you mean." After dinner, we walked along the river. The city lights reflected across the water. It reminded me a little of the hotel balcony after the wedding. Except this time, nothing was fake. "So," Steve asked, "any regrets?" I didn't even have to think. "Not one." "You?" He shook his head. "My only regret," he laughed softly, "is not asking you sooner." I bumped his shoulder. "You idiot." "I know. You made me fake date you instead. I had to test the waters. You could have just asked me to dinner." I panicked. "You planned an entire fake relationship." I panicked creatively. I laughed so hard I had to stop walking. When we reached a quiet overlook, Steve leaned against the railing. "I've been thinking." "Oh, no, hear me out." "I'm listening." "I spent so much time worrying about what everyone else would think. My family, Mark, our friends." He looked at me, "And none of them cared." I nodded. "We were the only ones making it complicated." "Exactly." A familiar voice suddenly interrupted us. "Well." We both turned. Mark was standing a few feet away holding a takeout bag. "You've got to be kidding me." I blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I live 5 blocks away." He looked between us before grinning. "I should have known I'd find you two acting disgustingly cute by the river." Steve groaned. "Seriously?" Mark pointed at him. "You." Then at me. "You. I'm happy for both of you. But if you start making out in public, I'm absolutely taking pictures." I buried my face in Steve's shoulder. "I can't believe we're related." "You love me." "Unfortunately." Mark laughed. "See you Sunday at Mom's." Then he walked away, still chuckling to himself. Steve shook his head. "I've known him 20 years. I've lived with him my whole life. Does it get better?" "No." We both laughed. The night had grown quiet again. The river reflected thousands of tiny lights. Steve looked at me. So, can I finally do something I've wanted to do since that practice walk in the park?" My heart sped up. "What?" He stepped a little closer. "This." He gently cupped my cheek, giving me plenty of time to move away if I wanted. I didn't. He leaned in slowly. Our first kiss was soft, unhurried. Nothing like the dramatic movie scenes people always talked about. Simply felt right. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I smiled. "You know." "What?" "I guess we broke one of our fake dating rules." Steve laughed. "The no kissing rule?" "Yeah. I think it's safe to retire that one." "I agree." He slipped his hand into mine, just like he had that afternoon in the park. Except this time, Neither of us was practicing. Sometimes I think about how close we came to never saying anything. How easily we could have stayed exactly where we were. He would have remained my brother's best friend. I would have kept pretending my feelings would eventually disappear. Instead, one ridiculous idea changed everything. A fake relationship, a wedding, a weekend neither of us expected to matter. And somewhere between made-up stories, practiced hand-holding, and pretending to be in love, we accidentally fell in love for real. Looking back, it was never really the fake dating that changed our lives. It was finally giving ourselves permission to stop pretending.